So bedtimes had to be absolutely stuck to. And so there was a point where my bedtime advanced from 8 to 8:30, which meant that on Thursday nights, or whatever it was, I was being sent to bed halfway through the Carol Burnett show. And it still makes me mad.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
I'm going to start with a reading, and that's going to be accompanied by a slideshow of panels from the book, so you can follow along. And I'll just set it up a little bit. So the period is the early 80s, and I'm in art school, and I've just started coming out to some friends, and in this chapter I'm experimenting with some dating and some sex. And the chapter's called Flowers of Romance, and the title refers to a song by a band called Public Image Limited, and this was the band that Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols founded after the Sex Pistols broke up. And it sort of occurs in the storytelling, but that's the title of the. All right, so if we can cue up the slideshow. Now that I was officially out, I was ready, eager for experience. I wanted someone to sweep me off my feet. Hey, wanna suck me off? I got a 7-inch dick. What? No. Well, maybe. The problem was I had no idea how to get started. Contrary to my first impression, Ontario College of Art was crawling with sexy bohemian guys. Some of them even seemed like they could be gay. Jimmy Shack, for example, son of hockey legend Eddie Shack, larger than life and way too intimidating. Took a look at the 17 paintings I did last weekend, and here's 5 more from last night. Mostly a decidedly macho atmosphere prevailed. I was discovering potential dates were as rare as authentic weirdos and good artists. Outside of art school, a rich, bewildering variety of approaches to sex and love were to be observed. And here we see a party at the Bain Co-op of older gay men, older than me anyway, gay men at the time. Paul and Martin, my friends, for example, were involved with the Toronto gay paper, The Body Politic. Scott, Gerald, this is our friend Maurice. The Body Politic crowd had put heteronormative views of coupling on trial and found them wanting. So, you're the artist. Paul has told us so much about you. The trailblazing BPers had created a paradise of guilt-free sex with endless partners. Maurice, let me introduce you to our host, Walter Daw. He's going to love you. Romance was bourgeois, imposed patriarchy, though some, like Paul and Martin, chose monogamy. Walter, darling, let me introduce you to my new friend, Maurice. Well, hello. I was attracted to some of the Body Politic clones, but hopelessly ill-equipped to navigate their world. You must come back for dinner à deux sometime, and perhaps a photo session? Maybe. Then there was the world of the Bloor Cinema. My sister Ingrid and I went there 3 or 4 times a week. Ingrid, look, there's that guy again. Cute. That's the 5th time in a row. I've got to meet him. So what are you having? I don't know. I can never decide. Can't I just have a bite of yours? No. Hey, he's friends with Fiona's sister, the ticket lady. Sheila, this is my friend Maurice. He wants to ask you something. I love your hair. Thanks. What's up? You know that Asian guy who comes here all the time? Yeah, his name's Winston. Stick around after the show and I'll introduce you. Hey, hurry it up, will ya? Wait your fucking turn, asshole! I'm talking to my friends! Oh, keep your money. It's on the house tonight. And then the next panel is later on after the screening, and I've been introduced to Winston. Wasn't Satyricon incredible? Yes, Fellini is just God. I still think Roma is my favorite, though. Oh, yes, the Papal Fashion Show. Winston, ready to go? Oh, hey, you should totally come out to Domino with us. I'd love to. So here we are in Domino nightclub, goth punk club, and the band Fad Gadget is playing on over the speakers. Takes hours of preparation to get that wasted look. Here are some of the characters that we see in the club. A more detached take on sex held sway in the nightclubs. Diffident, cool Andy Warhol was the presiding deity. Just like at Andy's factory, posing was in. Kids experimented with androgyny, bisexuality, and celibacy. Morrissey's quip, "Don't have sex if it bores you," resonated for many. Of course, this take it or leave it attitude was tied up with drugs. Have you seen Winston? No, I haven't. He's in the washroom. Oh, okay, thanks. And here we see Winston is shooting heroin in one of the stalls. What's up? Oh, nothing. I think I'll be going now, that's all. Well, it was great meeting you. We should hang out again soon. That'd be great. And I'll have to explain, these two creatures are inner voices in my head that are sort of at each other all the time throughout the book, and they show up periodically to work out problems and to get into it with each other. Not the boy for you, in over your head. On top of everything, romantic delusion was a theme of the weighty 19th century novels I was consuming in an effort to augment my mostly unacademic art school education. In second year, I'd befriended an unusual couple. The guy, David, was in a punk band called Polkaholics. The polkas often performed with queercore legends' Fifth Column, legendary all lesbian punk band. The girl of this couple, the girl, Frederica, was a talented printmaker with queerish preoccupations. Hi, Maurice! What? I said, hi, Maurice! She'd created a witty Oscar Wilde paper doll book, complete with a Prison Stripes outfit. Polkaholics are up next! What? Polkaholics are... Oh, never mind! Fred and David lived together, but they were in an open relationship. David had been writing me long, amorous letters filled with stories and gory-esque drawings. Only dimly aware he wrote such letters to everyone, I was blindly swept off my feet. Alas, just like in a novel, obstacles stood in our way. Where to be alone, for example. I longed to swoon in his daylight-deprived arms, but not in a filthy Larry's Hideaway hotel room. I lived in a constant, miserable state of unfulfilled longing, familiar from childhood. The impasse with David dragged on for months. My friend Deirdre, in particular, was sick of hearing about it. So here we are at the Barn nightclub, the legendary or gay bar, the Barn. Eartha Kitt's hit has just come out at the moment of my coming out. I don't wanna be alone, where is my baby? Chew my fingers to the bone, where is my man? Waitressing her way through art school, Deirdre's social world consisted of an ever-changing cast of gay actor model waiters. So, what do you think? I really like Michael. Out one night with a bunch of them, we'd been barred from Cornelius because of a strict no women policy and ended up at the Barn. Oh, good, because he's coming over here. See you. Having fun? Yeah, you? You're very cute, you know. Thanks. So are you. Feel like coming over to my place? I'll tell Deirdre we're going. At last, Maurice is making out. You know, I'm a I figured, it's okay. Have you heard about this new gay cancer thing? My friends have been talking about it. It's scary, isn't it? Wow. Relax. We won't do anything you're not ready for. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Bloop, 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 bloop. Bloop, 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 bloop. Morning. Hi. Last night was amazing. Thanks for not insisting. Nothing wrong with cocksucking. You didn't come. Next time. You know what? You're young. You should get out there. Have lots of experiences with different guys. Huh? But I'm having such a nice experience here with you. Deirdre had been masterful, orchestrating my first time with no preconceptions or expectations. It was incredible. Oh, Maurice, I'm so happy for you. I felt intoxicated, awakened, greedy for more. Are you seeing him again? We're going to a movie Friday. A week or so later, I arrived at the college to find, what? Class canceled. Downtown, with nothing to do, I decided to pay a surprise visit to the house Michael shared with a couple of roommates. Here I am, imagining my reception at the house. Little devil, get in here. Oh, hi, we met at the barn a while ago. I'm Michael's friend. Is he home? Oh, yes, come in. You must be frozen. Thanks. Michael has a guest. Come in and have a coffee and warm up. How do you take it? Just milk, please. Have it in my room if you like. We could talk. I've got to be going. So at night I'm working in the Christian school that I attended as a child as a janitor. And the boys and I have some time to think over the situation. Obviously, you weren't enough for him. You failed to capture his imagination. But the sex, this guy is the exact physical embodiment of your fantasies. Don't give up so easily. Give it a chance. Much better to find out the truth now and avoid more pain. Don't see him again. I sent you flowers. You wanted chocolates instead. Just because he was with another guy, that doesn't automatically mean he doesn't like you. You don't know him at all. The flowers of romance. But remember, he tried to tell you to move on that first morning, not to get too attached. Have lots of guys. Okay, don't see him again. Sure, the sex was amazing, but face it, you're not in love. Think what sex with love would be like. A few months later, Fred was away. At last, David and I had time together alone. Slurp, slurp. In Fred's mother's basement apartment. Pant, pant. Get out from under the covers. It's clear there's going to be no reciprocation. I'm going now. Bye. A little while later, I'm at Deirdre's apartment. Don't tell me. It was all over in a few minutes. Am I right? How would you know? She fucked him too. You too? How could you? It was a long time ago. It didn't mean anything. God, what a jerk. I know, men, huh? Oh, your first love. The end.
I'm just going to find my notes.
Yeah.
So I am Rachel Giese, an old friend of Maurice's, and I'm so happy to be here to talk to you about this. And I was lucky enough to see parts of this, the work in progress over a number of years, and get to see some of the work. And it's such a triumph and such a masterpiece of a book. It's so beautiful and so moving. As most people know, this is a story, a coming-of-age story. It starts when you're a child and goes through your adolescence, your coming out. I want to start at the beginning and talk about your childhood, which, as you describe, was filled with quite profound contradictions. You grew up in a religious Christian Reform home. Religion was at the core of your parents' value and identities. Your parents also loved beauty and art. So you had this experience of a home that felt quite austere, often violent, and yet was also filled with music and art and this love of beauty. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about what it was like to grow up in that home with those sort of that tension.
Yeah. Well, yeah. My father had a lot of anger issues, and he was very bitter, and he attacked us verbally, I would say, and later on in the book we sort of discover some of the potential reasons for some of this bitterness, and because of his personal life story. But yeah, it was an odd house because my parents were very blue collar. My father was caretaker in Etobicoke Public Schools, and my mother was a hairdresser. But my dad was very much interested in high culture, and he listened to opera records on the weekend. He took us to the symphony, and he took us on, whenever we went on vacation, it would be to there would be a lot of history involved. Like, for example, we went to Cape Cod when I was little, and we visited Plymouth and Williamsburg, and so yeah, it was a funny combination of things. But I think one of the things I wanted to show the most about the suburbs, though, was just how featureless they were, and how, for me, that was almost the worst part of it, was just how lacking in visual stimulation, particularly the suburbs were, and our church and our home and just the whole milieu of it. So I'm talking about Rexdale. We grew up at 401 in Islington, in Etobicoke.
Yeah. The book is framed like a fairy tale. It's broken into these 4 chapters. The first, fairy gifts and curses. The next, the spindler's prick. Then the sleep, and then finally waking up. It's such an effective structure for the book, but it also, I think, has a personal resonance, because fairy tales were, some of the first sort of stories, those great old storybooks with the beautiful illustrations. When did you strike upon the idea of telling the story of your life through this very classic fairy tale structure?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the very first lines of the book describe how I experienced periods of sadness as a child, and and I'd be sleepless, and I would hum the waltz from Sleeping Beauty over repeatedly until I sort of lulled myself to sleep. And so the Sleeping Beauty was there right from the beginning, and then it sort of keeps appearing in different guises throughout the book. And it kind of relates to some of the exploration of culture that is going on throughout the book as well. So it represents kind of low culture in terms of the Disney film, which I was obsessed with as a child, which takes the Tchaikovsky music and adds lyrics to the to make the songs. And then there's also the actual high culture, which I think is represented at first by the ballet, the actual ballet, the Tchaikovsky ballet, The Sleeping Beauty, being broadcast on CBC television when I was a child. This was the Rudolf Nureyev production that nearly bankrupted the National Ballet back in the 70s, but also established them as this international company. So there's lots of references and permutations with that theme that seem to apply to lots of stuff that's going on in the book.
And I loved it too, because I think it also is a way of kind of playing with gender. I think that, for someone who works in the medium of illustration and also comics, I think that the classic story, I think for a lot of boys get fed is, the Spider-Man stories, the idea of being an outsider and you discover you have powers. And to me, it seems like the way that the story of Sleeping Beauty gave you a framework to understand what it felt like to be maybe an outsider in this featureless place.
Sure, and she's also very passive too, and I think the story is about someone learning finally not to be so bloody passive.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about the family archives and the research. For people who haven't seen the book, this is an illustration that Maurice did of a gorgeous picture of him and his mom, and it's such a beautiful image. And in the book, you have, I know you drew from family photographs. So could you talk a bit about, did you have all these photos from your family? What was it like to go back and to be able to illustrate this, and to research this through family memorabilia and family archives?
Yeah, well, we were fortunate to have a lot of photos, and they were absolutely central to the whole creation of the first section, for sure. Incredible photographs. And it seemed like the more I looked at them, the more details I would find every time. It was almost spooky. Like, and then as I worked on the book too, over the years that it took to make it, I'd be so focused on like a really specific little period that more and more just memories would come back. So, for example, I remember it probably was like a 1967 Buick LeSabre, and one day it suddenly hit me what that Buick LeSabre smelled like. Especially after sitting in like a hot parking lot with like the dust and the synthetic upholstery and everything,
Right.
and it was just that smell just came back to me, and I was like, wow, it just was like really diving into the past.
Yeah. And likewise, as you get older in the story and make your way downtown, there's just great, great memories for me, having come to Toronto in my teenage years, of the Queen Street West scene, of Church Street. Was a lot of that just in your memory, or did you then also have to do research to remember what the inside of a particular club looked like, or a particular restaurant looked like, or what Queen Street at night looked like in 92?
Yeah, so Denise Benson's book about the history of nightlife in Toronto was invaluable to me. Like, thank you for doing that. It's such an incredible book. And then memories, and then also there's this Google Street View was an incredible help to me making this book, because you can look at a building from any angle basically. And there's also, I discovered historic Google Street View. So Google Street View obviously isn't that old, but they do have Google Street View from when they began, maybe 10 years ago or something. So I was looking for scenes of Queen Street West before it was gentrified, when it was all like used appliance stores and car washes. And I found that on Google Street View. Like, there's a button you click in the corner and you can find the historic, even if it's just 10 years old, it just shows how quickly things change here. So yeah, that was invaluable to me. Can I just say too, and
please.
we just saw the barn scene, and I don't know if people noticed, but there was a fan dancer in the bar. And these were guys who took these big Japanese fans and would dance with them. And, those guys sadly all died out with the AIDS era, but I was there for the last of the fan dancers.
But they live on.
Yeah, they live on.
They live on in the book.
Glad,
As we saw a bit in what you read, there's a lot of time in your 20s and 30s searching for love. You're quite a romantic. And there is this sense of, and again, because this is, in a way, a fairy tale of a story, there is this sort of, this yearning for love. But before you have some great love affairs, you have these great relationships with friends. And one of them you reference, Paul, particularly Paul, who plays an important role in the book and in your development. He was one of your professors at art college, and then became a kind of friend that I think is very specific to gay friendships, someone who acts almost as a mentor, as someone who sort of brings you into the gay world and sort of teaches you how to be gay. Most of us don't grow up understanding what it means to be gay or how to exist in gay culture. You portray Paul as someone quite complex, creative, eccentric, caring, but also difficult. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about Paul and his importance to you and in this story.
Sure, yeah. So when I met Paul in art school, I was taking his course called Plays and Performance. And Paul Baker was a very erudite man who knew everything about cinema. He had taught film at Western University. He had a PhD in literature, and he was a big opera fan, but he also loved All My Children and soap opera and pop culture, and he knew everything about that too. He would go to pop culture conferences in the States and give a paper on All My Children once in a while. So he was just this polymath, but he was utterly unpretentious. He would present all of this stuff with the same enthusiasm and fun and taking the piss out of Shakespeare, Just incredible. And we just instantly clicked. I had spent a lot of my life watching old movies, and we just basically spoke in the language of quoting lines from old movies together most of the time. That's the way we communicated. And so, yeah, I guess I was a bit of an older soul, and he was a youthful, older person, and yeah, we just clicked and laughed a lot over the years.
It also, when you were talking about Paul and talking about the fan dancer, I think it's resonant with your parents as well. But I wanted to talk about the title of the book because it's such a, it has a lot of meaning, and I wonder if you could talk about where it came from and also what it means beyond just maybe the initial reference of the line.
Sure. So the title of the book is "I'm So Glad We Had This Time Together." And this was the name of the song that Carol Burnett sang at the end of her variety show on television. And it was a very poignant song for Carol Burnett because she would do this signal at the end of the program after singing this song, and the signal was to pull her ear into, and that was a sign for her grandmother who actually raised her because her mother was an alcoholic. And so it has a lot of poignancy, obviously, for Carol and for the show. And then as a child, I was obsessed with Carol Burnett, and it led to one of the very first conflicts with my mother about the Carol Burnett show, where I was being sent to bed. We had very strict bedtimes in our European, strict Prussian. I guess you can relate.
Yes, I can relate.
It's very, very strict view of the world. And so bedtimes had to be absolutely stuck to. And so there was a point where my bedtime advanced from 8 to 8:30, which meant that on Thursday nights, or whatever it was, I was being sent to bed halfway through the Carol Burnett show. And it still makes me mad. So there's that. And then the title can be interpreted pretty straightforwardly in that way. And it can also be kind of snarky and sarcastic. And then there's this poignancy to it too, the sadness.
Yeah. Throughout, particularly, in your childhood, art, high art, low art, pop culture, whatever you have access to, really, proves to be an escape for you up to that world beyond this flat world of Rexdale. And what I'm struck by is, I think maybe like Paul, your taste and interests are broad. So it's sitcoms, it's Carol Burnett, it's classic movies, fashion, later porn as well, that all sort of rolls into one. And I'm wondering if you find that there's a connective tissue in all that for what your taste is, for what you're drawn to when it comes to art or culture. Because it does seem like it sort of is everything from, opera. Is it something grand and big and larger than life?
I think it's all about escape from this kind of the banality of daily life and the very real threat of physical violence I faced every day in high school. I was a tiny person, and people were often confused about my gender, and I just got called faggot all day long in high school, every single day. And people have had it worse. We've just been reading Derek McCormick, and he got his head slammed into lockers every day of high school. But it's all part of a spectrum, I guess, and to escape from that was an escape from that was to watch old movies and find drama and fantasy. Fantasy is a big thing for me, and fairy tale and all of that stuff that's just different from that cruel and boring reality.
Yeah. There's a really lovely chapter where you travel with Paul to Bavaria to visit the castle of Mad King Ludwig, the Neuschwanstein castle. And the chapter is called Stendhal syndrome. And I'm wondering, and you have an experience of it, could you talk about what the syndrome is and what happened to you in that moment?
So Yeah, so Paul Baker and I got tickets to the Bayreuth Festival 1 year, and this is the Wagner Festival that happens in Bavaria, and it's very, very difficult to get tickets to. It's very exclusive, and we scored these tickets, and we spent some time in Munich, and Bayreuth, where the festival is, and while we were there, I wanted to take a trip to Mad King Ludwig's castle because it's sort of loomed large in my childhood, partly because of Walt Disney, but also because of a book that my dad had about Ludwig. And so I had obsessed about this book, again, a gay man who's a dreamer and just wants to escape all of his responsibilities and escape into fantasy. I mean, it was just, we're like twins, kind of. Only he had the money to build giant palaces in the mountain. And so we're on this trip together, and we're visiting Neuschwanstein, and it's not really going the way that I wanted it to. And we are forced to take a tour of the castle. I wanted to just wander around and soak it up on my own. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to listen to some 17-year-old kid telling me facts about, like, the castle began construction, and, I just wanted to, soak up Ludwig's essence and spirit and commune with him spiritually. And so I'm getting increasingly upset with this situation, and eventually I wander off and I see this porcelain swan. And the porcelain swan appears on the frontispiece of this book that I had been carrying with me, which I have now learned that while I'm on the trip that Ludwig was in fact gay and very unhappy, as I had been too. And so suddenly, Stendhal syndrome refers to something that happens to people often when they're on vacation in somewhere really beautiful, and they become so overwhelmed with beauty that they have a nervous breakdown. And that's what happened to me up in the castle. Yeah. And Paul was, I just was weeping for like half an hour. And Paul just sat there and held me until it was done because he got it.
Yeah, yes. That transcendence, that transcendent experience that you get, that you depict so beautifully in the book, through art, through opera in particular, through old films, is so profound in it. And I think I'm curious about that in relationship to the faith you grew up in, because obviously, faith and religion can offer people that sense of transcendence. It seems like it didn't clearly offer that to you. However, I wonder if now where you are, having had to process this stuff that you did to write the book, is there anything about growing up with faith that you think it offered you or provided you that was positive instead of something that felt oppressive?
Oh, it's so loaded. Like, once in a while a hymn will come back to me, and I'll sing it to my partner, and it would just be like, where did that come from? And it's just like, I just know these hymns. We sang them so often, and some of them are so beautiful. And I just get terribly moved by it, because it represents a whole community of people that I was so intimate with and loved, and now I only see them at funerals, These lovely, lovely people who meant no harm, So that whole side of it is terribly deep and moving. And then for me, there's a big thing about the Narnia books as a child in the book. And they meant so much to me because they were a way for me to experience the Christian faith married to all of the fantasy and nymphs and satyrs and all the things that I loved. And when my mother explained to me that there was a parallel there with Christianity, it blew my little mind. Some people were disappointed, like people, I guess, who were with a more atheistic bent were disappointed to find out that there was a Christian story behind it. But I thought it was so brilliant that he could think of that. But then it also caused this guilt and this shame, because I liked the Narnia books better than the Bible, really. Sorry. Sorry, patriarchy. Yeah.
we're going to open it up to audience questions, and I have a couple more questions, then we're going to open it up. So if people want if there are things they want to ask Maurice, you can get ready. I don't want to give too much away, but and it sort of is alluded to a little bit in the reading you did, but you also tell the story about some mental health struggles that came as a result of the trauma you spoke about, the violence at school, the kind of, near constant threat, random violence that you experienced as you got older, homophobia coming out during the AIDS crisis. And then you also depict a wonderful therapeutic experience that you have. And I'm wondering, first of all, about the choice to actually depict some idea of the therapy sessions you had. Did it feel like, when did you make the decision that had to be a part of this story? Something that intimate?
I think kind of right from the beginning, because in fact, the story is told in a linear way, but I could have done it through starting with a therapy session and then traveling back in time, but I eventually decided to just do a linear story. But I very much, I don't really have a program for the book. But one thing I did really want to show was actually how therapy can work for someone. Therapy is a lot more accepted now than when I began the book in 2012. So I think there isn't that much stigma around it anymore. But I did want to show people who were maybe skeptical about it or poo-pooed it, just how it can work and how it helped me so much to overcome all this crap that I had. Yeah. And
I also, you brought it up in the reading, the two characters that sort of exist outside you that are kind of, externalized aspects of yourself.
Yeah.
One voice that's perhaps a bit kinder, more optimistic, and another voice that is harsher, meaner. It's a great device, obviously, in a graphic memoir because it sort of allows for internal dialogue. But I'm actually wondering, is that how you experience those kind of voices? Are they almost like these separate figures, like those? I mean, not to say voices in your head, but do you experience it as these sort of externalized beings? I'm just wondering, as a visual person, is that how you experience it?
Yeah. So no, I don't see them visually. But when I was growing up, I did experience not an inner monologue, but an inner dialogue. And I don't want to give too much away either. But in the end, they kind of merge a bit, and now I only hear one voice in my head. So, and then I also, you're drawing a graphic novel. Why? So one of the things I wanted to do was to make it weird, and so it seemed like a natural choice to create these characters, to embody these voices, just to make the book visually interesting and not like. Otherwise, why are you drawing all this stuff? Why don't just take photos of people and.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted it to be a little bit out there, and these creatures I think help do it.
Yeah. I want to ask you one more question, and then we'll open up to the audience. The book's been out now for a couple of months. I know when we were talking the other day, you mentioned that you had heard from people, responding to the book, either from Christian Reform communities, religious backgrounds, and I'm just curious about some of the reception, not just from those people, but also people who may have known you from art school years, or have you heard from people about the book and what it means to them?
Yeah, I've been hearing lots of stuff. Yeah, from former Christian Reformed people who are moved by it and can relate to a lot of it, obviously. And I recently met up with a friend from high school who is depicted in the story, and I was a little nervous about him reading the book because it shows me fantasizing about kissing him. And so we met up recently just through a series of weird circumstances. And before he had seen the book or even heard about it, we got together. And he, in his late 50s, recently came out. So I was kind of like, phew. You know, okay, well, that's going to be a lot better now. So this was a person who had not experienced his life sexually at all for many years, and had a specific kind of thing that he was into that he thought only he was into because he was so, you know, naive and just kind of, he thought he was asexual. But anyway, I don't want to tell too much about that. But yeah, so there's been some very moving stories and accolades from people, and yeah, but that was the most incredible story.
That is incredible.
Yeah.